Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jonathan Ferguson. I'd like to welcome you to our third Wisconsin Knowledge Boost session. I work as a financial capability specialist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Division of Extension and am part of the planning team for this series. As we start today's session, I encourage you, as you're interested, to share your name, workplace, and location as an introduction for others. I believe we have that option available to you um, with our functionality here. As you likely know, over the last few years, there have been many changes to important public programs and policies. Those changes have been challenging to navigate for many Wisconsin residents and the professionals who support them. To help minimize this challenge, the Institute for Research in Poverty and the Division of Extension at UW-Madison have partnered to offer this quarterly virtual learning series. It is important to note that views expressed by our speakers don't necessarily represent the opinions or policies of the Institute for Research on Poverty, UW-Madison's Division of Extension, or any other sponsor, including the University of Wisconsin-Madison. A few notes. This session is being recorded and will be posted on the UW-Madison Extension YouTube page by next week. Throughout the session, feel free to drop your questions as well in the Q&A box/chat. We will do our best to address these questions as well as questions that were submitted during registration. And we have a great lineup of speakers to discuss childcare in Wisconsin. Due to our limited time for this session, though, I will not verbally introduce our speakers, but will provide that information in the chat as well. So let's just jump right into things, and we'll start off with our first speaker, Dr. Alejandra Ros Pilarz.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alejandra Ros Pilarz, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and just under Rogemom School of Social Work. And I studied childcare and early education, including some work in Wisconsin. Let me just share my slides. Okay, so I am going to start us off by talking a little bit of background information on why early care education matters and what are some of the challenges and opportunities for expanding access to care in Wisconsin. How does early care education matter and why should you care about it? So there's a wealth of evidence that high quality and affordable early care and education promotes children's development, parents' ability to work, and ultimately fuels the economy at large. We know that children who attend high quality ECE, especially children from low income families, they do better in school, are more likely to graduate high school and attend college, and also tend to be in better health and have higher earnings in adulthood. And these gains have positive spillovers to the economy and society at large. High quality and affordable ECE is also critical for parents, especially mothers' ability to work. So when ECE is unavailable or parents feel it's unsafe, parents tend to leave the labor force. And this results in lost earnings, not only for them, but also negatively impacts the economy when employers can't find workers or have high turnover. So let me say a little bit about what I mean exactly when I talk about high quality early care and education, or ECE. ECE refers to different types of settings. We think of the center-based sector, which includes things like private childcare centers, public pre-kindergarten, and publicly funded Head Start programs. These are organizations that provide childcare and early education services to groups of kids. And then we also have the home-based sector, and this includes licensed family childcare providers that provide care for small groups of kids in their own home. Also, individual non-relative childcare providers like nannies who care for one or a few children in the child's home or their own home. And these can be regulated or unregulated providers. And then children's relatives are an important source of regular childcare. And these are sometimes paid, but often unpaid as well. Now, each of these settings can provide high quality care, but on average, licensed settings and center-based settings tend to be higher quality compared to unlicensed or unregulated settings. What I mean by high quality care is this is characterized by the quality of the interactions between children and their caregivers, as well as the provision of safe and stimulating environments that have age-appropriate materials for children to explore. So children thrive when their caregivers provide sensitive and responsive to their needs and engage them in ways that stimulate their learning and curiosity about their environment. Early care and education caregivers themselves are the most important ingredient of high quality care. There are also structural features of ECE that can support or make it more likely for high quality interactions between children and caregivers to occur. These are things like the education and training of caregivers, as well as things like the adult to child ratio in a classroom or the group size in the classroom. These can support high quality care, but are not in and of themselves sufficient. I want to take a minute to show you what children's participation in ECE looks like. These are national data showing the proportion of infants and toddlers 0 to 2 years old and preschoolers 3 to 5 years old who are in regular ECE. So what you can see from the figure is that about 48% of infants and toddlers are in regular ECE compared to 68% of preschoolers. Most infants and toddlers are in home-based settings, whereas most preschoolers attend center-based ECE settings. Now, these differences in participation in ECE between infants and toddlers and preschoolers, we think are due both to parents' preferences for different types of care when children are younger versus older, but also due to the availability of ECE. So care for infants and toddlers has the highest cost, is in most limited supply, and there's the least public investment in care for infants and toddlers as well. So what makes it challenging for families to access high quality and affordable ECE? The key challenge is that the cost of providing high quality ECE is higher than when parents can afford to pay out of pocket. As a result, childcare isn't affordable for many families. The supply of ECE is not enough, and educators or ECE workers earn very low wages. So this figure shows families' cost burden for ECE, which is what we use to determine whether care is affordable or not for families. This is the percentage of family income spent on out-of-pocket costs. So what you can see is that about 26% of families have what we would consider a high cost burden, where they're spending 10% or more of their total income on ECE. At the same time, ECE educators earn very low wages. So what this other figure shows you is average wages for family childcare providers, center-based ECE teachers, compared to Wisconsin workers with a high school degree. So based on the amount of income they take in, amount of hours they work, family childcare providers earn little more than minimum wage. Center-based ECE teachers earn about $13 an hour, which is still $3 an hour less than typical workers with a high school degree. And this is despite center-based ECE teachers, most of them having some college education. Okay, so what can we do about it? So I'm going to take a minute to just say what we know from research perspective about what are things that work to increase access to affordable and high quality. The first is that public investments that subsidize the cost of care for families help to expand supply. So these are public investments like programs through Wisconsin Shares Child Care Subsidy Program, through public pre-K, through Head Start. These reduce costs for families and allow them to use a range of programs that would otherwise be unaffordable to them. However, we also learned that it's important to pay attention to how investments in one sector of early care education might affect other sectors. So for example, in our work in Wisconsin, we found evidence that expansions in public pre-K, also called 4-year-old kindergarten, actually reduce the supply of licensed family childcare providers. And this has negative implications for availability of care for families that are more likely to rely on licensed family childcare, like infants and toddlers. A second key thing that we know from other states that have expanded care is that increasing educator compensation is a critical part of expanding supply. Increasing compensation is important for stabilizing the workforce, meaning retaining current childcare workers, as well as attracting new educators that are qualified. So we know that turnover is associated with poor quality care across various measures, as well as with poor child outcomes. So it's really critical that when you expand supply, you adequately compensate educators. Otherwise, you risk exacerbating turnover and lowering the quality of care. And then finally, we've seen some evidence that providing direct grants to ECE providers can help with stabilizing supply. Because providers operate on razor-thin margins, funding that can support the costs of providing high-quality ECE for existing providers can help to retain them, and grants to new ECE providers to help cover the cost of starting their business can also help to increase supply. So while providing access to high-quality and affordable ECE can be a challenge, there are solutions that work, and I will leave it at that, and I will turn it over to Jeff Pertl.
Thanks. I'm going to share my screen here. All right, can folks see that?
Yep, you're good.
Great, perfect. Okay, so let's talk about, and I'm going to reinforce a lot of the things that we just talked about, but really from the perspective of the folks that are sort of operating less of the research, but more the in-practice programs and what's going on. But let's talk a little bit about what this challenge looks like for folks here. Okay, so families can't make ends meet. When we think about this median Wisconsin family, who are they? They've got two parents, both of them are typically working. They've got two kids, and they make about $78,000 a year, which means they make too much for subsidy. If you think about what these families look like, about 2/3 of two-parent households have both parents working. In a single-parent household, 90% of those are headed by moms, and 3/4 of moms are in the workforce today. And when we think about this sort of affordability crisis that is happening all across the country, childcare and housing are two of the big drivers consuming people's budgets. We saw that a little bit in the research. In Wisconsin, statewide, folks are spending about 30% of their income on housing and about 20% of their income per kid in childcare at the median. In the most expensive markets in Madison and Milwaukee, housing's up to 40%, childcare is 30% per kid. So in Madison, where I live, it is conceivable that you are spending 100% of your income to put a roof on your head and to put your kids in care. Now, I don't know about you all, but I have two kids. I got two boys, 8 and 12, and it turns out that they need to eat. I got to buy them clothes all the time. They like heat and internet and electricity, and I got to drive them places, and they need health insurance and a whole bunch of other things that basically mean that families need to earn twice as much as the median, not quite, to do what you and I would think of as like the basics. And that, my friends, is the affordability crisis in a nutshell. We've sort of moved past this idea of like low income, middle class, and upper class to a world of people who are living paycheck to paycheck and renting, to a universe where if you're lucky enough to own a home and have a job with retirement, then at least you're participating in the big drivers of the economy, which is home ownership and the stock market, and then like the ultra rich. Okay. But the everything else is shrinking and everything else is so expensive. And the challenge in childcare is, as was mentioned, is that it operates on razor-thin margins. Labor is intensive. It is a hard job. Insurance is expensive. You got to pay rent and utilities, food and supply. And, even though the wages are low, it consumes a large share of the budget. Now, I've been in a lot of childcare centers all across the state, in-home providers, and the governor and I will travel, and inevitably I will look across the street and there will be a Culver's or a McDonald's advertising $18 or $20 an hour. And as we talked about, the wages for childcare are very low. At a center in Wisconsin, it's about $13.50, very close to that research we were looking at. If we compare it to just the average wage in Wisconsin, they're making over $28 an hour. So we get a huge gap between the childcare wage and sort of the median wage in Wisconsin. Half the folks don't have access to health insurance, and 14% are on food share or some other benefit. So this is a low wage activity. We see that in other care-related fields like long-term care, but this access part becomes real critical. because it sets up an impossible decision for childcare providers. And childcare is one of the 3 largest women-owned businesses in the state of Wisconsin. It's a huge driver of income, but they're left with an impossible choice. You can raise rates, which is already pricing families out, and can reduce enrollment. One of the things we see is, as we sort of talked about, the ratios are smaller for those infants and toddlers, so those classrooms are more expensive. The 3 and 4-year-olds are sort of, your revenue center. That's the place where, because the ratios are more permissive, you might have 8 or 12 kids in a classroom, that the economics work out a little better and you can offset the infant and toddler cost. But as we've moved kids into 4-year-old kindergarten, and as prices go up, those families will opt out for less expensive choices, whether that's a public program or some like part-time care. And so raising rates doesn't always solve your problem. In fact, it can make the problem significantly worse, not just for the families who are paying, but for the actual enrollments in the family providers or the centers. And of course, the other thing is we already pay an unlivable wage, and paying a lower wage is just driving huge amounts of turnover, empty classrooms where we don't have someone to put in, or poorly trained staff, people who have the skills are moving on to either centers that pay better or often into other fields or even K-12 where they can use their credentials to earn more money. And they should, they want to, but that leaves us in crisis in this childcare sector. So what are we doing to stabilize that? I'm going to Scooby-Doo for a minute and take a quick walk back through time. Oops, went in the wrong direction there. Quick walk back through time as we look at across 3 different administrations. We're coming to the end of the Evers administration here. And I think you see really different approaches to how folks tackle childcare. When Governor Doyle was in office, they made big investments in the Wisconsin Sheriff's Program. He actually made efforts to unionize childcare through executive order. And then in his last 2 years, that last legislative session, both houses of the legislature were Democrat. They actually passed a law unionizing child care workers, family care workers. They created the Department of Children and Families. So, really recentering part of state government on this whole issue of childcare. And they created the Quality Young Star Rating System. Now, at the end of his term, we also ran into the Great Recession of 2008. There was the banking crisis and collapse. And really, there's a huge reduction in state and federal spending, ultimately. And when Governor Walker comes in, we see that the investment in Wisconsin shares just kind of falls to a standstill. And as a result, as prices climb, the buying power of the state subsidy continues to go down. Governor Walker's famous for Act 10 and dismantling unions, including the child care union. And it has some really negative effects on program quality. And what we see, and we're going to see in a couple of slides here, is a massive decline in the number of providers. A huge shift starts to happen during this time period. When Governor Evers comes in, we reinvest in Wisconsin shares. Of course, we hit the pandemic, so there's a huge massive change in social structure that happens, but there are efforts to expand the child care tax credit and the creation of child care counts during the pandemic. And what we're going to see in the data is that child care counts helps keep prices down and starts growing the number of providers again. We go through several budgets with child care counts. This last budget, we'll transition that into the bridge payment program that's ending right now. We'll talk about the impact of that. But also the creation of the first state-funded childcare program, which is Get Kids Ready, which focuses on those 4-year-olds, trying to stabilize that part of the industry, ensure that kids are ready to go to school. But what we are going to see in the macro is that childcare counts really is the foundation of a next generation childcare system. And if we match it with what some of the other states are doing around their expansions of subsidy, I really think there is a clear roadmap for building a modern childcare system. And this is really important because in the 1800s, we had one-room schoolhouses. And we had to create the common school district. We had to create union high schools. We eventually create unified school districts. It evolves further. You get choice, you get charter, you get all sorts of things that happen over time. But there are these huge structures that get created. Same thing in higher education. Lots of private colleges at first, then the creation of land-grant universities, the university system, even that ebbs and flows. The 2-year college is sort of gone away with the advent and the growth of the technical college system. And what we see is as these institutions evolve, they're trying to meet the expectations and needs that people have for society. We needed more education. We built systems to do that. Today, when everyone works, we need an early care and education system that's going to enable people to work and take care of their kids. And we need a systemic response to do that. Because you can see across these administrations the impact that the difference in these investments are making in terms of affordability. And what we're going to see with that is a huge shift in access. So from 2013 to 2009, there's basically a free fall in the number of providers. We started with 6,500. We're going to end that time period, about 6 years, at 4,500 providers. Now, there's two things going on here. One is a global reduction in providers because the economics of childcare just aren't working. But the other thing is a shift from family to group providers. So even though we have fewer providers, there is still a fair amount of capacity in the system as we see the growth of centers and bigger centers that are serving more kids. But it also means, while we can serve more kids, a smaller geographic footprint. And so those rural areas feel this reduction very keenly with fewer and fewer family providers. But here's when Counts gets created. So you can see this free fall gets arrested. We sort of flatten out during the pandemic, and we actually start moving back up because one of the really critical outcomes of childcare counts is that it stabilizes and then grows the industry. Folks are spending that to not only maintain their childcare centers, but also in particular to invest in wages, often in bonuses, because they weren't sure that the money was going to be there permanently. But if you put a permanent structure in place, you're going to see growth in the number of providers and capacity, and you're going to see higher wages. And we see it very clearly in the last few years, from 2002 to 2026, we're up almost 250 providers compared to where we were. So we lost 2,000 in the previous 6 years. We gained 250 in the last 4 years. So the growth is not as fast as the free fall, but we're moving in the positive direction. And that is one of the things that's keeping people up at night about the end of childcare counts and bridge payments, is what it's going to mean on this provider side piece, both for wages and for the number of centers that are open. Now, again, the other side is, can families afford to pay it? And this is super important because 25% of our families are in the Wisconsin share subsidy today. 75% of families pay the full cost, okay? And right now, that full cost is over $17,000 a year in centers and over $13,000 a year in family programs. That is a big, big number for families, right? What else costs $17,000? All the hail damage people are replacing their roofs right now probably costs less than $17,000, or at least in the ballpark. You can buy a used car. You can pay tuition at UW-Madison for the academic year for less than it costs for you to pay for your kid to go to early care and education. And all those things that we just talked about, those are things you can finance. For higher education, we help people start saving from the day that they're born if they want. And there are tons of different ways that you can finance home improvements and cars, but childcare, you got to pay out of your pocket every week or every month. It is a huge cash flow challenge for families and a massive demand on their spending, and they just can't afford it. And now that we're coming to the end of bridge payments, that's going to intensify that. So what our providers are telling us is that 25% are likely to close their programs. Now, one of the things about early care and education is these people are saints. You shouldn't have to be a saint to have a job, but they end up working through these massive challenges for very low wages to continue to serve kids because it's so mission driven. But we're going to see closures. We're going to see folks leaving the field, and that means closed classrooms, less hours, bigger wait lists. We're also going to see tuition go up, particularly infant and toddler. Everyone's going to raise tuition. It's a huge factor of what's going on. And, you're talking about somewhere between probably $25 and $50 a week for a lot of folks. And you start adding that up week by week, and you're talking about major increases in costs. And so what that sets up for folks, here, I'm going to stop sharing here for a second. I can just see everybody. What that is setting up for folks is a set of really important policy questions that the next governor and legislature are going to navigate. There is huge demand on this. And historically, almost all our childcare funding is federal. There's a little bit of state match in there, but it's all federal. President Trump's made it very clear he's not confident that the federal government can continue to invest in childcare because of the massive expenses related to the war in Iran. Now, Congress tends to feel differently about this, but I do not think the federal government is riding to our rescue in this scenario. What I think is going to happen is exactly what happened in K-12 education. States are going to take the lead. That's what we see in New Mexico. That's what we see in Vermont. That's what we see in Wisconsin. People are going to build a next generation childcare system to meet people's needs. It's going to need a foundational component like childcare counts that pays the providers, stabilizes the field, and supports the wages. It's going to need some sort of major expansion or global or universal approach to subsidy. Instead of spending 30 or 40% of your income on childcare, what we see states looking at is trying to cap it at 7%. That doesn't mean people aren't going to pay for care. They are going to pay for care, but you're going to put a system in place that could put back $20,000, $30,000 a year in that median family's budget. And that's going to help them buy that car, save up for that first house, save for college, do all the things that we think middle-class families should be able to do. All right. And so childcare is going to be transformational in that. There are a lot of ways that businesses can interface in this. I know Sachin's going to talk about this a little bit, but whether it's, through specific programs or providing dependent care flex accounts and matching funds, there's lots of things that folks can do. And to do this kind of scale, we're probably going to need some major investment from the state. And we see that, again, in New Mexico and Vermont. There are many different strategies for doing it. And at the end of the day, this is the most transformational thing that we can do, both for our economy and for families. People are waiting to have kids. They're having fewer kids. They want to be able to do this, and we can solve this problem. This is not some unsolvable thing. It simply takes an investment in governing partners that are willing to do it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kelly Borchardt. It's really great to be with you today to discuss family and childcare provider experiences in Central Wisconsin. Please advance the slide, Jonathan. Thank you. Looking at this map of Wisconsin, childcaring is located in region number 6. We serve 10 counties in Central Wisconsin. We're one of 8 nonprofit childcare resource and referral agencies, or CCR&Rs, in Wisconsin. Our network is administered by Thriving Wisconsin, which is our state association. And through Thriving, the CCR&Rs receive funding from the Department of Children and Families, thanks to Secretary Pertl's leadership, in order for us to provide referrals and resources to families, childcare providers, communities. We offer training and support for area childcare providers. We offer data, awareness, and advocacy, along with many other entities around the state, around the importance of quality early care and education. Each of the CCR&Rs also provides unique programming with other local funding from community foundations, United Ways, private donors, etc. Please, next slide. As the CCR&R in Central Wisconsin, what we're hearing from families and what we're seeing as we're out in the field are some of the same issues you've heard already. There's accessibility issues, affordability issues, and a lack of childcare workforce. I'd like to share 3 stories with you today as I go through each one of these issues. These are stories about individuals living and working in Central Wisconsin. 25 years ago, there were over 1,000 regulated childcare programs in Central Wisconsin. Now there are less than 250. As you can see by the chart on this slide that shares data from just the past 10 years, the number of childcare programs are decreasing at alarming rates. Many families live in a childcare desert, especially in our rural communities. And my first story to share today is about accessibility. We have Katie and Bob. Katie and Bob always imagined they were doing everything right. They both earned college degrees, built stable careers, waited until they felt financially ready, and were excited to welcome their first baby into the world. Like many first-time parents in Marathon County, they assumed that once their baby was born, they would be looking for childcare and find a good option before their maternity leave ended. What they didn't realize was that many childcare programs in the area have 2-year wait lists for infants. By the time they connected with childcaring during their maternity leave, Katie and Bob quickly discovered how limited the childcare options were. One after another, centers explained that infant slots were already full. Some of them told them they could add their baby's name to the wait list, but there were dozens and dozens of families ahead of them. Today, their son is on 7 different wait lists across Marathon County. Katie's maternity leave ends in August, and they still don't have childcare secured. The stress has become overwhelming, as you might imagine. Every week brings uncertainty. Will one of them need to reduce their work hours? Can they afford unpaid leave? What happens if they don't have care until August? Even when they do find an opening, the cost will be significant. Slide change, please. In Marathon County, infant childcare averages about $300 a week, more than $15,000 per year per child. For Katie and Bob, the issue is not a lack of planning or financial responsibility. They are exactly the kind of working family communities hope to attract and retain. Yet despite stable jobs and a solid income, they're struggling to access something as essential as safe, reliable infant care. Their story is becoming increasingly common across Marathon County. Families are facing long wait lists, high costs, and impossible decisions about work and caregiving. Employers are affected when workers cannot return after parental leave. Children miss opportunities for those early learning and social development, and parents carry the emotional and financial strain of uncertainty during what should be a joyful season of life. Childcare is not just a family issue, it's a workforce issue, an economic issue, and a community issue. Families like Katie and Bob's need solutions that expand access to affordable, high-quality childcare so parents can work and children can thrive. Other examples were a traveling nurse that turned down a contract to work in central Wisconsin, and we most recently heard from a foster family who turned down placement of a child as a result of not being able to find care. My second story is about affordability. Lynn works hard every day serving her community through her job at a local police department. But like many parents, she faces a challenge that's becoming harder and harder to manage, and that's affording childcare. As a single parent of 3 adopted children, Lynn has had to make difficult decisions just to keep everything afloat. The cost of school-age care was so high that she could only afford before-school care for her children. Even with careful budgeting and working full-time, there simply wasn't enough left over for the extras many families hope to provide for their kids. Thanks to Childcaring's Good Start Grant program, a locally supported program funded by United Way and local foundations, Lynn's children are still able to participate in sports and activities along with their classmates and neighborhood friends. Without that support, those opportunities would not be possible. Families like Lynn's are doing everything they can. They're working hard, they're giving back to the community, they're raising children in loving homes. Yet childcare costs continue to create barriers for everyday families. Affordable childcare support doesn't just help families get to work, it helps children belong, participate, and thrive. Slide change, please. The third story I'd like to share today paints a picture about sustainability of our childcare workforce. A day in the life of a childcare teacher. Sarah's day begins before the sun is fully up. By 6 a.m., she's unlocking the childcare center door, turning on the lights, and preparing activities for the children who will soon arrive. As families trickle in, Sarah greets each child with a smile and a warm welcome. She helps ease separation anxiety, she listens to parents share important updates, and she makes sure every child feels safe and cared for. The day quickly fills with story time, art projects, outdoor play, snack preparation, diaper changes, a few tears, and countless teachable moments. Sarah celebrates a toddler's first successful use of the potty. She comforts a child who misses home, and she helps preschoolers learn how to share and solve problems together. While it may look like play from the outside, Sarah is constantly teaching, building language skills, encouraging curiosity, supporting social emotional development, and helping children gain confidence. There's very little time for break or for her to eat lunch. By the end of the day, after the last child has gone home, Sarah cleans the classroom, prepares for tomorrow, reflects on the small victories that happen throughout the day. It's demanding work, but knowing she's helped shape a child's future makes every moment worthwhile. Childcare teachers are more than caregivers. They are educators, mentors, problem solvers, and a critical support for working families in their communities. Despite the important role Sarah plays in shaping young lives and supporting working families, Sarah earns $15.50 an hour, even with a bachelor's degree. Her employer isn't able to offer her health, dental, or vision insurance, a reality faced by many early childhood educators. And Sarah's childcare program was fortunate to receive childcare counts and childcare bridge payments for the past several years. They've also been the recipient of local scholarship funds to help pay the costs of the required entry-level training needed for their staff to work at the center. This center, like many others, are deeply concerned about the end of the childcare bridge payments. This childcare program will either close their doors or increase tuition by 20% in order to remain open. Sarah continues to worry if she can continue to afford doing the job she loves. Without sustained public and private investment, this will be the final story of many early childhood programs and educators. Childcare programs cannot continue to survive on parent fees alone. Slide change, please. This is my final slide. We have QR codes here listed to invite you to join our listserv or to find us on Facebook. Thank you so much. I'd now like to turn it over to Sachin Shivaram, who will share the perspective of a Wisconsin-based employer. He's the CEO of the Wisconsin Aluminum Foundry.
I think you're muted, Sachin.
Yep.
There you go.
You
got it.
You missed all my brilliance in my opening joke. Oh well. No. Well, good. Good to see everybody. Amazing turnout here. Haley mentioned yesterday there was 375 people and maybe even more. I'm so grateful to all of you that do this work. I know I've seen Jeff out on the road. Seems like he's everywhere across the state. Clearly, this is crunch time to make the case, and well, it's beyond crunch time, to make the case for continued funding for childcare counts or whatever manifestation of public funding we're going to have for childcare. But really good to see some familiar faces. I saw Ruth Schmidt on the list of people. She and I have worked together on this, and really good to see a bunch of people whom I personally don't know. I haven't, and don't recognize kind of the names, but that's speaks to kind of the huge universe of people that we have in the state who are out there supporting this cause. And I also love to see the intersection of higher ed and state government and NGOs and of course industry that Haley and Jonathan have brought together. It's really the way we should win public support for every issue. So thank you for being here. I am CEO of Wisconsin Aluminum Foundry. We are a metal caster based in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. We have plants around the Midwest. And so you're probably wondering, why is a guy who makes aluminum on this call? And that's a good question. For our company, for me personally, childcare has become an issue of deep passion, sparked by really a conversation I had with just one employee 6 years ago. He was a single dad, and I've told this story before, and maybe some of you have heard it. But I was talking with him. He's a single dad, and he works second shift. And I was talking with him in the parking lot, and I looked over into his car, and there was a pink car seat, and it was amidst to just a sea of garbage, like Mountain Dew wrappers and chip wrappers, and I kind of had a pang of like, what does he do for childcare? And I asked him, I was like, what do you do for childcare? And he said, well, I take my daughter to a different home or a different place every day, kind of whatever he can muster, or whoever is free. His daughter's mother is in recovery, and she was able to kind of take care of her daughter on Fridays, but others days she couldn't. And I'm just imagining this child, 4 years old at the time, who, toothbrush and toe and sleeping bag and kind of being shuttled from home to home. And it just makes you so sad, sad that, our kids are in that sort of environment. And, we're a company that we pride ourselves on paying really well. We pay starting $27.53 an hour for people with no skill, no manufacturing skills. We teach them everything. And, that's a $50,000-$60,000 a year job to start, and yet they still are not able to afford childcare for precisely the reasons that our speakers have told you. I mean, it is incredibly expensive, and so I didn't want to repeat all of that data that but I want to tell you a little bit about the experience from a business, how it is, and Kelly shared some stories. I'll share you a story from just this week. I was up in our factory in Minnesota, and we had a young woman who lived about 45 minutes west of our city. We're in Crookston, Minnesota, and she lived in Grand Forks, and she'd drive her child 45 minutes the other way, so further west into North Dakota, and then drive to work, and then drive back. And I'm thinking about her. I mean, that's 3 or 4 hours in a car a day. And the child, is spending an hour and a half, 2 hours a day in the car. And I can only imagine how she goes home. I mean, both of them, stressed by the day, making the ends meet, probably no time to make anything reasonable for dinner. And then it's, back up the next day to repeat everything. And it really breaks your heart, but how does it appear from the business side? Well, she left us this week. She actually said she couldn't do it anymore, and she's a great worker in our machine shop up there. And she lost. I don't know what employment she'll be able to find. Manufacturing actually right now is kind of in a tough spot, and I hope she's able to find something. But it's a major loss for us and of course for her. And so what we see at a business is this giant issue, for people who are earning $50,000-$60,000 a year to be having to spend, a third of their pre-tax income, probably 50% of their post-tax income on childcare. What does that do, to our workplace? And so, as you can imagine, it results in absences and turnovers, and people who just can't take our jobs. We operate 24/7, very difficult to find staffing for second and third shift because of the lack of childcare. And so it's not an employee's personal problem only. It is certainly a problem for the entire economy as we're trying to grow our businesses and help our communities prosper. So what we did 6 years ago, was we launched a simple benefit where we pay $400 per month to any employee who has a child for whom they pay childcare expenses. Now it is morphed into kind of a no questions asked, like we don't even want to know how you're spending it, just here's the money. But initially we started it to support, and we thought, in kind of a paternalistic way, which I am kind of ashamed to realize now. We were like, well, look, we don't want our employees. I was thinking about that dad in the parking lot, and I was like, we don't want our employees to be, putting their children in suboptimal care situations. We want to, have them in licensed care so that the child is educated or is in educational environments. And so we said, here's $400, but you have to put it in, but have your child in a licensed care provider. And it takes 2 seconds for the people on this call to realize what took us a year to understand, which was that capacity is just not there. So of course the uptake on the benefit was very low because people didn't have those options. And so then we opened it to any provider. We said, look, doesn't matter what you're doing. We understand it's a huge financial burden. I wish we could do more, but here is $400 per month that we'll do, that will, to support you. And this is a big expense for us. We have about 100 employees on this. We have about 1,000 employees overall. We're not a big company. And we're spending $500,000 per year, of after-tax profit for us on this benefit. And so it is a big deal for us, but it has made a huge impact on our employees. The anecdotal information I hear about what this little bit of help, even though it's a big deal for us, it ends up being a tiny bit of the expense really means. New hires cite it as a reason they're able to rejoin the workforce. So many of our parents had said, they're able to stay in the workforce because of this benefit that they can get that makes the care more affordable. But one employer can't fix a broken market. We tried a whole bunch of different things to help our local communities enact structural reform. We started a consortium with a bunch of local partners to build a new childcare center. We worked with our local economic development agency to develop a grant proposal for a new benefit program that would, encourage businesses to buy in and then would wean them off the support over 3 years. We worked with our local YMCA and we kind of put together a pro forma on all the costs. And it was astounding what we came up with, which is what you all know, no surprise, that it's super expensive, and it just turned out to be not economical for us as an individual employer, as employers grouped together. And we couldn't find, public funding to support our efforts. And so, unfortunately, we failed in our, efforts to enact some sort of more structural, longer-lasting reform. So, what we tell researchers and policymakers is, these benefits really matter. I have not done a detailed study, and hopefully we can entice Alejandra or someone, from the universities to take our data, talk to our people, and understand, how our benefit plan has actually helped employee retention and hiring, and happiness, frankly. But we know it moves all of those things. I believe in the simplicity of the benefit. Just a simple, don't give me a whole bunch of stuff. Just here's the money, and please, we know you're gonna use it towards your children. That's enough. I think people's lives are already so complicated. The paperwork, we participated in, I'm blanking on the name right now, but the Partner Up, which is the program from the DCF, which is well-intentioned, but I think we all recognize that it was just kind of gummed up in paperwork and stuff that was hard to navigate, and I don't think people felt the full scope of the benefit. And what would actually change the game? Look, I love the focus from Alejandra's presentation about high quality and education. I mean, really, this is, so many of our communities, our employees, they talk about, childcare, well, they call it daycare. And it's really like a mentality of, this is where we stash our kids while we go to work. And, that pains me. This is not what this is about, which you all recognize. This is about helping our children get on the trajectory. When my high school classmate and college classmate, Raj Chetty, famous economist, did a study that really encapsulated all of this for me. This is about from 10, 15 years ago, when he talked about the impact of a kindergarten teacher on the life trajectory of someone's income. And I think that resonates with all of us without even having read the study or seen the data. That really resonates that this is about education and quality, and not just, where are we going to put our kids during the work week or work day. So that's all I had to say. I know we want to save some time here for questions, but the last thing I would just say is I'm happy to when I come in these presentations, I'm the guy from the industry or from a company who talks about why childcare is important and how important it is to retention and recruitment. But really, this is not the reason why childcare is an important issue for us. This is about our children and the experiences they're having. And, again, thinking about that young girl, 4-year-old, and what sort of life she's going to grow up into, not having the advantages that so many of my friends, live in bigger cities, and, your friends who live all over the place, their children are having enriching experiences because they can afford it or because their communities have it, that our children, many of our children, are not having. And that is what this is about, and it's not about workforce. Like, even as an employer, that's not. And I feel like as you're making the case to people to whom we need to make this case, the economics and the industry and all that stuff only goes so far. Really, we need to get people to believe in the heart of this matter, which is that it's about our children and educating them and giving them a nurturing environment in those critical 0 to 5 years. So thank you for having me today.
Great, thanks. I think we're moving on to the Q&A portion. So if everyone wants to if the speakers want to turn their cameras on, that would be great. I will kick us off with a question in the chat that I hear very often, and I think is important to address here. So someone asked that it seems that the rates people are paying, centers should be able to increase their wages. So other than operating expenses, are centers having some state imposed or other fees they're trying to keep up with? So in essence, like, why is the cost of care so high? Why can't parents afford it? And given that educators are not earning very high wages or earning regular wages. So is there someone, I'm thinking Jeff or Kelly, you might be able to answer that. One of you want to take the first pass?
I can take the first pass, and then Kelly can jump in. It's all my fault. I'm personally responsible for all of the price increases going on in childcare. I think when we look back, childcare is an industry like any other. So we have huge drivers in personnel. We're not the Jetsons. Humans are taking care of humans. AI is not going to step in and take this role over. They're the largest share of the cost. And part of that cost is not just that people are expensive, but they're constrained by ratios. So when we talk about serving infants and toddlers, nobody, parents, policymakers, anybody else, wants to have more than 4 infants in a room with an adult. Well, no matter how you do the math, if you got 4 kids, even at $20,000 a kid, your total revenue for that room is $80,000. And from there, you're going to have to pay the staff, pay the rent, the heat, the utility, the diapers, the food. You start adding all those things up. And we think about the affordability economy. All those pieces of food and rent and other things that are going up, same thing with wages, really put a constraint on affordability. Now, I will say, we have a lot of rules and regulations, and they make providers crazy. Providers want to keep kids safe. There are important things in there, but there are a lot of rules, and they do have an impact on how people spend their time. We are driving to be more flexible and balance this, what is really essential for safety and, what is sort of best viewed as guidance, especially as kids get older. We've gotten a lot more flexible with after school. We've gotten a lot more flexible, I think, with older kids. It's the infant area. And that is where most of the cost and demand is in the industry. And I think that's like a center of the challenge. Kelly, what do you think?
Right. Like, I think too, Jeff, I think we see some success with programs who are maybe able to be under the umbrella of another larger organization like a YMCA or a school district when some of their administrative costs are offset, or they're able to offer some of the important benefits to their workforce as a result of being part of another larger organization. But to live strictly on parent fees alone, when you have to pay your staff, pay your building costs, your materials, supplies, it just doesn't work. It just simply doesn't.
And there's a lot of paperwork. I mean, there's just a lot of transactional. It's not like, there's a lot of paperwork in schools too, but everybody's got their own systems. People are doing things in Excel and figuring out how to do billing on their own. You're doing all the parts of the job. That makes it super labor intensive if you don't have those scales. And I think that's the other reason we see this shift towards centers is not only can you pay more and generate more and more likely to provide benefits, but you get to what Kelly's saying, that a little bit of that administrative relief. But in rural areas, we're not going to have that. Home-based care is going to do the after hours. It's going to do the coverage in those areas. Centers are much more concentrated where there's population centers and high traffic areas. That's just a reality of the footprint of the state. It's true across the country. And so you need that base level of funding to keep things going.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll just add, I think from the research perspective, also, it's you can lower costs to some extent, right, by decreasing regulations. But when you run the risk of providing low quality care, that ends up either parents don't want to use, won't send their kids to, or ends up harming kids, right? And to really get the return on investment in childcare, you really need to be paying attention to the quality of the care and not just expanding access, but also expanding access to high quality care. Otherwise, you do set on the benefits that we see, in research for kids' development, for parents' ability to work, and for over benefit society as well.
Well, I mean, to your point, there are a bunch of states that have very much lower levels of regulation. It's not like they don't have a huge demand problem. Like they didn't solve their problem through regulation.
Yeah. Okay, we have a few new questions in the chat. Someone asked, I'm going to go to Sheila's question, which is your thoughts on investing public dollars into new programs as opposed to focusing on existing and potential private programs, which I presume means also some private bonds programs. What are folks' thoughts about? You haven't talked a lot about the existing programs already, but what are folks' thoughts about really investing in those as opposed to do we need new programs that address some of the gaps in the existing programs? I will open up to anyone, or I can call it. Kelly, do you want to take a first pass? Or either way, sorry.
Sure. I mean, I think we have a lot of great examples. There's local examples of investments by counties, by employers, by the state. I think, the biggest successes we've seen so far are when you have some public funding, you have some private investment, you have a lot of people that are at the table trying to figure it out. I think there are lots of great examples in the state of Wisconsin, across the nation. It boils down to what I heard Jeff say this week. We need more funding. We need more money. We need more people that care and that can come to the table with their pocketbooks. I think that's the continued story.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think what Kelly's saying really resonates with what Sachin was laying out, which is we need to keep it simple. I cannot stress enough how adamantly opposed I am to pilot programs and new initiatives. I'm not interested in that conversation anymore. I think there's a lot of room for local innovation. I think states need to lead. We could do a simplified version of childcare counts. I mean, there's nuances to it. Who cares? You could just do one version of childcare counts. You could do a universal subsidy. And the beauty of that is you can get rid of eligibility. We could streamline a lot of the pieces of this. It would work much better. Essentially becomes co-pays for your childcare access. And then, we could think about what we need to do to finance that. It will cost some money. And you know what? That's okay. Like, it would be a major public service. And I think if you look at when school referenda are successful, when schools come in and say, hey, we're going to do this for you, and people believe in it, then they vote to put it through. I think the public would come through and say, yes, I'm willing to pay for a systemic solution to childcare that would actually grow the industry and reduce my cost. And I don't need 16 programs to do it. I need like 2 things, maybe paid family leave. I mentioned that in the chat. I think that is a really helpful component to this. And then local folks can do other things. We could work on the business side of this, but no more nickel and dime things. Build a system that makes sense.
This is a question that was submitted earlier for folks who registered and wanted to know more about the Get Kids Ready program, which Jeff, you briefly mentioned. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that and how it fits in with the existing programs in Wisconsin.
I mean, I think so. What Get Kids Ready is a sort of analog or parallel to 4-year-old kindergarten in schools, but offered by childcare providers. So it's for 4-year-olds. They've got to offer a curriculum. It's designed to get kids ready, just like, hence the name, just like 4-year-old kindergarten does. You have to have a credentialed teacher, but it's embedded in the childcare program. And in that sense, it's significant in 2 ways. It is $65 million of state funding. We've never had a big state commitment. It's the first, we sort of breached the dam, if you will, in this budget. And I think that's really, really important. And it really focuses on the economics of childcare too. By looking at the 4-year-olds, we're concentrating on sort of how to make this private sector a little bit more stable. Now, where I think it's a challenge when we contrast it with things like childcare counts was both addressing kids of all ages. So we had after school kids and we had infants and toddlers. And this interim strategy is really focused on stabilizing around the 4-year-olds, which I think is of tremendous benefit, but is not enough when you don't have counts. It's a thing that would sit on top of that sort of foundational structure that would help address, again, There are a lot of kids in after school and summer camp programs that were getting support and funding that aren't getting any. In infants and tots, Ruth is in this thing. She will kill me if I do not say this. Infants and tots is where all the demand is. We have got to tackle the infant toddler crisis. Thanks, Ruth.
All right, I am sorry to have to cut things off, but we are at 1 p.m. That went by incredibly fast. I want to thank our speakers for all of the information they shared. And I wish we had more time. I truly do. But the recording will be shared in the near future with those who registered. Slide information will also be shared. And we will ask our speakers if they have time to reply to any questions that were submitted during registration or that we didn't get to during the webinar that we could also share in our follow-up messaging to registrants. So again, with that, I want to thank everybody for their time and appreciate our speakers again. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.